Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we're building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of about a dozen episodes every couple months. This season is all about lean, mean capital allocation machines. Capital allocation is the process of deciding how to spend or invest financial resources. Now that we have on-chain primitives, how will on-chain capital allocation work? In what ways can we build more democratic, more scalable, precise, or just weird capital allocation mechanisms? What are the coolest experiments? These are the themes of Greenpill Season 4, Lead Mean Capital Allocation Machines. One special thing we are doing this season is we're allowing you to collect this episode. All episodes this season, including this one, are available on chain. You can go to pods.media/greenpill to find episodes and start collecting. Thank you to MMAonchain.eth for being a recent collector of the Greenpill podcast. If you want to learn more about the Greenpill podcast, you can visit our website, thegreenpill.network, where you can download the Greenpill book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local Greenpill.network chapter. Okay, well, our guest today is Daniel Ospina. Daniel is a DAO, org design and community architecture, decentralized governance and innovation specialist. He is the instigator at Rn DAO and the ex-head of governance at Aragon and supervisory council at SingularityNet. He was a fellow at the Royal Society for the Arts and is a visiting lecturer at said business school at Oxford University. I was really excited to talk to Daniel because we've been just kind of like trading ideas on Twitter for years now. And I think he's one of the most interesting thinkers when it comes to DAO design, DAO governance, network-based coordination. And that's what we talk about a lot on this episode. I'd say the through line of this episode is how do you design for agility and connection in the age of networks? And we talk about swarms as a mechanism for capital allocation. So quite a fun episode. I think you're going to enjoy this episode with Daniel Ospina. Hey, Daniel, what's up? How are you?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I'm excited to talk to you today about capital allocation and your work at Rn DAO. Why don't you tell us what you're up to there?
Sure, thanks. So with Rn DAO, we started a little bit over 2 years ago, thinking that the way we are going about building a lot of applications in Web3 had many different challenges. One was that, especially if you're trying to build something that is a B2B application, some sort of product that is going to serve other organizations, etc., to do their thing. There is a really, really important to understand from the beginning what those users need, what they want. And there wasn't a lot of that happening. But also the sales cycle or the amount of time it can take to convince a group of people to try what you're building is really, really long compared to convincing a single person to try something. So if you're building an application for individuals, all you need to convince is one person. If you are building an application for groups or organizations, you need to convince the whole group or the whole organization to even try it. And at the same time, then looking at the different Web2 approaches for entrepreneurship, there is a huge failure rate. Like in venture capital, we have roughly 9 out of 10 startups that fail. Then if we look at hackathons, there is some data showing that 75% of hackathon winners abandon their projects. So these are different teams at which capital is being deployed that are trying really, really hard to succeed, but they encounter a lot of different challenges. So with Rn DAO, we started to think about how can we do these differently, and arriving to this sort of idea of a swarm as an innovation approach, as a way to fund these teams, but not only give them capital, but also put a whole support infrastructure around them that is very much based on peer-to-peer collaboration as well. Because we find that a lot of entrepreneurship works as a sort of cottage industry. Like every startup is learning on their own, especially if they're a first-time founder. They're just kind of trying to learn so many different skills and assemble all of these different networks, access, capital, all of these things that they need to build a project that survives. And it's extremely challenging. And if we can turn these into more of a supportive system where people help each other, where you can reinvest the lessons from one time to the other more effectively than we have done in Web2, then hopefully we can reduce the failure rate. We can reduce the wastage that our traditional innovation capital deployment system has when we're trying to build what are commercially sustainable ventures, essentially those that have a business model that means that they can keep on going and keep on doing their thing and hopefully grow and bring it to more people.
Want to get more into swarms, but before we do, I wonder if we could go deep for a couple of moments on your experience in the crypto ecosystem. Your ex-head of governance at Aragon, which is a major project, supervisory council at SingularityNet over the years. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that experience has informed Rn DAO and your work there?
Yeah, sure. So when I joined Aragon, that was early 2021. I mean, I had been following Aragon since 2018, and in a way, it was Aragon and Colony and that first generation of DAOs that got me into Web3 at the time. I came from an organization design background, so it was a little bit different than most people that arrive through trading. I was more obsessed with organizations. And I started working with a lot of these organizations, or at least finding my way in. And one thing that struck me is that there were a lot of really talented developers. There were a couple of business people, but there were not many people thinking about organizations and how they actually work. And because Web3 had sort of this idea of being the leading edge, then people were coming here to learn from Web3, but we were not learning a lot from what had happened outside of Web3. So, like learning from political science and behavioral economics and group psychology, and all of these fields were, especially at the time, extremely, extremely disconnected. So, I absolutely adore this space. And the reason I came here is because you have this wonderful combination of people willing to try new ideas, a lot of really, really smart tech talent, and this amazing infrastructure that has been built over the years, and also capital to try and do new things, to run new experiments that you wouldn't really be able to fund or try anywhere else. But then in the way we were executing on it, it was at times kind of frustrating to see us reinventing the wheel or failing where we as a species have, like, very plural, we have already failed before. And I was thinking, is there some way that we can make new mistakes as opposed to repeating some of the mistakes that have happened, and how can we do that more effectively when we're also trying to move fast and do new things and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very fruitful ground for new experiments in governance and capital allocation and digital scale coordination. And yeah, it's really fun to be working in crypto. And I feel like you and I are working on similar problems, but from different angles.
Yeah, very much so. It's kind of one of those spaces where if you can dream it and convince a few people, it's going to become real more, like, faster, more naturally than anywhere else. But then you go and try to do those things and hit the complexity of these problems straight in your face, and have to
Yeah,
deal with all
love
the
it.
messed up results.
Speaking of the complexity hitting you straight in the face, it says in my notes here that you were a chef before you got into crypto. There's a few years in between the two. Has that informed any of the ways that you approach building things in crypto?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I went into food because I was really fascinated with the sort of blend of creativity, technology, culture, and all the kind of stuff that was happening around molecular cuisine. And I went and worked with a bunch of, well, at the time, some of the highest ranked chefs in the world. And these guys were meant to be extraordinarily creative. But by the time you got there, they were no longer creative because actually they had so much pressure from their success that they had no time to explore new ideas. And they were at the same time surrounded by all the people that have come around because of this reputation of it being a really exciting, innovative place. So all these young people full of ideas, but that had no clue how to translate those ideas into practice and didn't have the resources to do so. So it was kind of like having all the right ingredients in the right place, but not working together. And so these very famous organizations will slowly decline and the talent will eventually leave and go somewhere else and start building somewhere else, as opposed to actually collaborating in a way that could be more efficient. They had to go and start and build one star, second Michelin star, and then build up from there, and then finally be something else. But then one concept that has really, really struck me is this idea of mise en place. And that's something that I took very dearly from the food world. That is, because when you're in a restaurant, you don't really know what's going to hit you. Customers might order a fish dish or a meat dish or a vegetable dish. They might arrive at table of five, or five tables of five might arrive at the same time. And it can very, very quickly become a mess. So what these good restaurants do is this thing called mise en place, which literally translates to stuff in the right place. So it's thinking very carefully, what's this sort of setup that you can have that allows you to react very fast and effectively to whatever is coming your way. And it becomes kind of like a mindset of you organize all this stuff. So then when something comes in, you can process it, you can react to it very, very effectively. And that as a metaphor for organizations, I think is really powerful because you're not trying to design necessarily just for what is happening right now, but you're trying to design a system that can react to constant changes in the environment, to constant evolution of ideas, to people coming in and out, to all kind of different circumstances. And you want to have that system that is resilient and flexible at the same time.
Yeah. When we were doing our research on you to build this episode, this quote really stuck out to me. Sameness and scale were advantages in the industrial age. Agility and connection are what matters in the age of networks. And so I think that you're taking these lessons that you had from being a chef and applying them in the 21st century, building DAOs and governance tools.
Yeah, I guess it's what becomes a little bit different here is how, or actually not even like thinking about it, like kind of thinking out loud how it relates to the restaurant world. But one of the most successful restaurant empires that I saw was very networked. It was not a top-down corporation with huge monolithic business units, but it was multiple businesses that were collaborating together. And they had a sort of R&D lab that was doing some of the initial development process and passing these ideas to the other teams. But they all together had this very coherent philosophy of what they stand for. And it was this philosophy, like the coherence, the convergence on this philosophy that gave them on the other side the ability to react very quickly to each of these different businesses that were part of the network to do their own thing in their own style for their own needs. Like one was a pub, another one was a one Michelin star, another one was a free Michelin star. So they were serving very different customers. They were serving very different needs, but they had managed to crystallize very coherently a cohesive philosophy that meant that they could all be evolving, all could be changing very quickly, and at the same time share resources, share learnings, share a common brand that allow them to attract more customers and so on. And it's kind of like that idea of keeping the balance while in movement. Is they were not static. Their menu was changing on very regular basis, and they were not centralizing that it was only one person mandating everything for all of them because there were just too many decisions for that to ever work. But it was finding the underlying principles and the setup, the organizational setup that allowed them to do that.
I've been a software entrepreneur for longer, but in crypto for 7 years. And the more and more I learn about the philosophy of networks and how networks organize, it's really fascinating to me. I feel like I grew up in a hierarchical world or the end of the hierarchical world, and now I'm learning a lot about networks. Would love to focus the conversation from here into talking about swarms and networks and swarms as a mechanism for capital allocation. So it feels like you're really behind this phrase swarm. How do you define a swarm, and what's exciting about them to you?
The way I'm framing a swarm is as a network of teams where each team is fundamentally autonomous and independent, but these teams can very easily work together and collaborate. Now, the thing here and the difference with a market, if you have different companies or projects, etc., in the market, and they're maybe doing partnerships, maybe buying and selling from each other, that's just a market. When it becomes a swarm is when you can create more collaboration between these teams in a way that is very agile. So collaboration in a way that doesn't constrain them. So you have in one extreme when teams become completely codependent and let's say they're part of the same corporation. So you have the HR team, the marketing team, the finance team, etc. And none of these teams can survive in isolation. If you remove any of them, the whole system kind of dies. And that makes it fragile and makes it slow. In a swarm, the idea is that each of these teams could more or less survive in isolation, but together they can thrive. So borrowing some of the metaphors that you have used recently, like around the mycelium thing and so on, is not about being fully independent, like in a market. It's not about being fully dependent, like in a corporation. It's about being interdependent. And so the way we're developing these theses and developing these ideas is that these teams have some cross ownership between them. So similar to in Japan, there was a phenomenon like this in the 80s that was called keiretsus, and these were companies that bought shares into each other. So in Web3, we can design it a little bit different, but essentially all of these organizations, all of these teams have some interest, some benefits in the others succeeding, but each of them can make decisions autonomously and can very quickly find the best opportunities for them to pursue. This is also, for example, happening in China with a big multinational that is Hire, that became the number one IoT company in the world. So what we're trying to do in Rn DAO is create a swarm that is focused on collaboration technology. So we have a set of different programs that allows us to inspire entrepreneurs to work on different challenges, to research different challenges, start prototyping, start developing a solution. We offer them a lot of support along the way. But as they join the swarm, as they start to develop their ideas, if they succeed, they become co-owners of Rn DAO, and Rn DAO becomes a co-owner of them. So we create this network of interdependence, and then a set of platforms and processes for them to collaborate. So we have, for example, what we call a collaborative CRM that is essentially a database of who they are selling to. And each of these teams can see who the others are selling to and ask for introductions. They can also have a CRM for investors or capital allocators and say, hey, we need more capital. Can you introduce us to this and this person? They refer talent to each other. They also have a database for market insights. So we start to have these different tools that allow them to collaborate in a way that doesn't require them necessarily to find a lot of common agreement on many things, but allow them to find the maximum amount of support on each other.
These networks of interdependence seem really fascinating to me. One vision that we've had at Gitcoin was basically of this idea of a DAO of DAOs, which is basically a mesh network of DAOs that are either all collaborating with each other on the social layer, on the technology layer, or the economic layer. And we felt like we saw a glimmer of the DAO of DAOs at Gitcoin when all of the different DAOs in the ecosystem were funding the Gitcoin matching pool. So there was like a transfer where basically like Chainlink and Yearn Finance and other DAOs were funding the matching pool, and then they would get like brand recognition, and then Gitcoin would like fund the Ethereum ecosystem, and it almost felt like the emergence of multicellular life for us. I'm using a Gitcoin centric example because that's the one that's native to me, but there's probably hundreds of other examples like this out there in the ecosystem. It feels like what you're talking about with swarms is like a little bit more on like the team level than on like the DAO level. But it's interesting to think about the interdependence of the projects up and down the stack within the Ethereum ecosystem. And I'm wondering if there's any other primitives of interdependence that are interesting to you. You mentioned Kiratsus, which are Japanese conglomerates. Are there any other sort of interdependent systems that have inspired you in coming up with this vision?
Well, there is a range of different organizations that have tried to do these over the years. And by the way, I think with what you guys were doing at Gitcoin, we're very much sensing into the same vision. The more I look, the more I see this thing starting to emerge everywhere. It's just taking slightly different shapes, like everywhere from Amazon, which I don't love, by the way, but Amazon, the company, you start to see some of the patterns. They start to organize teams. They are increasingly tending towards these. I mentioned Hire, the Chinese company that are performing really, really extraordinarily well doing these. There is some signs of this happening in the US with Morningstar, which is a tomato manufacturing plant. And they're really amazing in that the whole organization is governed by agreements between peers. So let's say the truck driver has an agreement with the person that unloads the tomatoes from the truck, and that's actually their contracting method. Is not a top-down contracting method, is a peer-to-peer contracting method that in aggregate creates a whole manufacturing plant for tomatoes. And tomato processing is fascinating because it's a very low margin business. Like if your can of tomatoes costs 2 cents, 5 cents more than another company, then you're not going to be able to compete in that market. People very often choose the cheapest can of tomatoes. So the fact that a fairly decentralized organization can compete, and not only compete, but actually they are the largest tomato manufacturer in the US, the fact that they can do that extremely efficiently is really, really surprising, and goes on to show that when these things are properly designed, they're not only viable, they're not only resilient, they can actually be very efficient too. And that's very, very challenging. Like in Web3, where we have still a lot of gaps in tooling, a lot of gaps in systems, in processes, etc. So I think get to those levels of efficiency and effectiveness that these guys have. But the difference is once we're doing it in Web3, is a lot more exponential. Like a lot of the code is open source, a lot of the tools, we're making them available for many other networks, etc. And so it's kind of like this new organizational form that is trying to emerge. That's where I was searching for a meme. I was like, well, this is really the essence of DAOs, has always been a little bit in this direction for me. Like I keep evolving my idea of what a good DAO would be, or of course there's going to be many different ones, but trying to evolve my idea of that pattern. And I end up naming it more recently Swarms, simply because there was a lot of backlash with the term of DAOs. But what we're talking about is like this sort of digitally native, network-based form of collaboration that is more natural given the fundamentals of our age, of the technologies that we have available, of the sort of cultures that we have, of the speed at which the market changes. Top-down corporations cannot adapt; they cannot keep up with these. So we start to have these small focused teams that aggregate to a bigger thing. And once they aggregate, that is the DAO layer, or the DAO or DAO layers that you're talking about.
I was tweeting something the other day about DAOs, and I think you responded with, "How do we evolve DAOs to be something actually functional instead of the current oligarchical mess? There are many better options." It feels like you were teasing Swarms a little bit there.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was being a bit of a reply guy, but that's the idea. Is I the way I'm getting excited about it is we had a lot of DAOs being built kind of like from a central product, then outwards. And now that the ecosystem is richer, maybe we can start to think of how do we create these DAOs bottom up, as in like aggregating a few people that want to work together into a thing, a few teams that want to work together into a thing. And this is very different because in the traditional way, you have kind of all the resources and all the powers at the top layer or at the center, and then you're delegating these. And this is possible, like a lot of the work we were doing with SingularityNet and some and with Aragon back in the day, etc., was trying to find paths to progressively decentralize. But there is also the opposite path, and we have had nowhere as much experimentation here of teams that start to find more ways in which they can collaborate and so create a shared layer, like a shared pool of resources or a shared pool of data that they can share, a shared brand, etc., to do certain things, which is kind of like the essence of joint ventures, etc. And I think our imagination into the types of collaborations that can happen here is still quite limited, and there is a whole universe to be explored. It was not too different from what the guys of like Inverter Network and so on were sensing it, like Prime DAO were sensing in back in the day. It was just too early. But now we're getting more and more to the point that we have actually the technologies to bring communities together and do more ambitious projects that we do as a collective.
I see all the reasons a priori why this is a strong vision. I'm wondering who you think is doing it well in practice, or at least who's attempting to do this well in practice. And could we dive into any of those examples?
It's very hard. I don't know if I have like one example that is really championing it. I'm taking elements from a lot of them. I can already mention it, but like the Chinese corporation Hire, I think they have a lot of things really, really right. It's also like Chinese culture, so they overwork. They're a little bit obsessive with measuring everything in a way that sometimes can be a little bit toxic. But these guys have a few really amazing patterns that I see us replicating a lot in Web3. But so they have small teams where the leaders are democratically elected, or at least can be democratically kicked out. And these are small teams, like up to 15 people. The teams, they have their rewards, or their compensation is based on the team succeeding. So a lot of them have a very, very small fixed salary, and then a very large part that is variable, that depends on the team's performance. And that performance is not assessed by some arbitrary criteria of what the executives believe this team is adding value or not, but is actually created through a network of teams that are buying and selling products and services from each other. Like, we're trying to advance this vision in Rn DAO. I think we have a bunch of things right already in this regard. Like, one thing that we invested a lot of energy and attention into was creating a compensation system that would allow contributors to operate across 2 or 3 teams, and essentially each contributor to customize how much commitment to each team they would have. and in a way that also allow them to either be paid in fiat, like in value that they could immediately cash out, or be rewarded with some form of ownership or participation in the future success of that team. And the more we enable these, the more we enable essentially people to find within the network the place where they could add the most value, and as well tailor their risk profile. So they could be working in a team that pays them good amount of fiat, in another team that is more early stage that could be a moonshot, but so they're investing their labor there a little bit, hoping for future rewards, kind of thing. And it gives people a lot of flexibility to customize their risk profile and find the places where they contribute the most. I also think that you guys in Gitcoin have done multiple things really well, like the direction that is going now of separating more into these different product teams, but having a very cohesive philosophy of how this aggregates. That I think that's exciting. I haven't followed Maker with a lot of detail, but I believe they're fundamentally sensing into the same vision and going after it. To some degree, Bankless DAO used to be doing these. It's just that there was not enough discipline in the process of allocating funds and having enough external focus. Ultimately, like I think, like the majority of large DAOs have tried to do this. The issue is if you have a really big central treasury, everyone starts dancing around it, figuring out how to get more resources from the core,
Yeah, tell me
right?
about it.
Yeah. And what is really hard to instill is market discipline. Is like find ways to add value to someone who's not the central DAO. Like go and deliver value for the ecosystem. If you can deliver value to the ecosystem and you can actually then bring in some of that value to sustain the organism, then you're gonna, as an organism, you're gonna grow and you're gonna have more resources to nurture and develop yourself. And that is super hard. But that's like, I guess, the key thing that a lot of us are missing. Also, something that we are working very hard on in Rn DAO is ensuring that we have methodologies and we're training kind of everyone wanting to start a pod or a unit, as we call them, or a venture within us, training them in user research, training them in how to get resources from the outside world. And then the capital allocation part of it can be matching or giving them some sort of stipend, but they need to show actually traction and success and progress in validating that they are delivering value to the larger ecosystem before they can get more capital from the inside.
I find this all really fascinating. I think the audience will too. Given that we're getting towards the bottom half or bottom third of the episode, I think I'm going to start moving into final questions. If you're massively successful, Daniel, in the next 10 years, what does the world look like? Or what does that look like? So take us forward to 2034, and there's a world in which swarms are everywhere. What does that look like?
I mean, the most important thing for swarms being everywhere is that we have enabled millions or even billions of people to pursue their dreams and to especially to tailor work to their needs. Right now, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is chasing unicorns, is extremely high pressure, is very much like all or nothing. Swarms can create a more resilient ecosystem that is extremely innovative, where we're developing new products, new services, new ways to serve people in a way that's way more efficient right now, but also at a lot less cost to the individuals, a lot less of give it everything, lose your hair by not sleeping, work 20 hours a day sort of madness. We have actually been able to change that and create a more resilient, well-being oriented, but also not less performing in terms of generating new technologies, new innovations ecosystem.
Beautiful. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say?
No, not at this stage.
Okay. Daniel, I think you're really a very thoughtful writer and thinker, and you're putting it into practice at Rn DAO. Those are the type of people that I like to have on the GreenPilled podcast. You've got a priori knowledge from the theory of this, and then also the empirical knowledge of putting it into practice. So I think it makes for really interesting listening, and swarms seem really fascinating. I'm looking for ways that I can apply them at Gitcoin, and I'm wondering if there's listeners out there that are looking to apply some of this work in their own DAO or within their own team. Are there any links where they can check out your work or places where they can figure out how to put it into practice?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working more and more on the documentation side of these, But for now, the best resource is just go to our website, rndao.io. So that's rndao.io. And there you will find the link to join our Discord. Join our Discord, introduce yourself, and then you'll speak with one of our community members. We put a lot of attention to everyone who introduces themselves. We try to have a call with them one-on-one, and then we can share a lot about how we are organized and how you're doing, or give you access to our internal documentation. It's not publicly available, but once you join the community, you can learn a lot of the different patterns. Also, like, the key thing is we're trying to build a tool. We're trying to operate as a swarm, building the tools for swarms, because otherwise it would be quite contradictory. So as we progress, and anyone who's interested in this sort of space, we want to make it super easy for anyone to build and operate a swarm. And it's still early days, but we're starting more and more to have those tools available for others to use.
The dog fooding loop is the interesting thing to me there. I know that I've been trying to get Gitcoin to run more QF and retro PGF rounds in order to build Gitcoin, which builds QF and retro PGF rounds. So it's
Nice.
sort of interesting if you think about these ecosystems using their own tools to build their own ecosystems. There's this law of organizational dynamics called Conway's law, which basically says that organizations build products that reflect their organizational structure. And I kind of think of, like, if you're building capital allocation tools that you then use, it's like an inverse Conway's law where you're designing products from your organizational structure, and then those products affect the organizational structure, and it creates this like infinite loop, or like infinite game upward spiral. And so, yeah, I don't know, what has it been like having building swarms in a swarm?
So one thing that's been actually very challenging has been being able to get this idea clear enough and crystal enough, and people to sense into it with enough strength that it doesn't get polluted by the traditional mechanisms. So there is kind of like a constant role of inquiring what is a swarm and why is it different and is it valuable, that kind of permeates all the other conversations. But then the other thing is, now that it's gathered some momentum, and at the beginning it was kind of quite hard and draining, and I was trying to convince people that this made sense, and it was during the bear market, so I had a lot of capital and people who were interested to invest, and they all kind of disappeared once the bear market got really bad. So at the beginning it was quite tough, but now that is sort of taking its own momentum, what I find really beautiful is that I'm surprised every day with some of these people who started having a conversation around some topic that they thought was important, and now they're launching a new initiative. They're doing something about it. This guy wrote something, someone else came into the organization, they started a new product, and now they're using that product to improve how we operate internally. So constantly, every time I'm kind of having a challenge, there is very frequently someone raising their hand, is like, hey, how about we use this new tool that I'm prototyping? This could have this other idea. So we're changing our compensation model thanks to someone that did a research fellowship with us on compensation, and now is developing a new compensation model. At the same time, our decision-making process, we used to have a lot of meetings, etc. And now there is someone who create some mechanism to analyze the responses of surveys with some algorithm, and now they're changing the way we make certain decisions using these, and these are all a lot of still early prototypes, but it starts to become more and more generative with those new ideas, and that's the most exciting thing.
That's pretty cool. All right, I was trying to enter final questions and to close the episode, but then we went down a little rabbit hole there. I think for the
Sorry,
better,
yeah.
though. Anything else you want to say before we wrap?
No, well, mostly thanks. Thanks a lot for having me. I follow your work for a while. I love what you guys are doing. It's really great to be here and be able to share a little bit more of these ideas. So hopefully we can have more collaboration. In a way, I left Aragon and started these because I strongly believe that doing these things very collaboratively, as even through small teams that we each do our thing well, we collaborate with others, we can go a lot further. So I hope these ideas resonate with other people, and we can advance this mindset shift of, if you have an idea, you don't necessarily need to go and do everything by yourself. You can also find other people who are doing that and either collaborate with them, build on top, reinvent it, remix it somehow. But through collaboration, we can make Web3 really what it's meant to be.
I love that. What's the old proverb is, if you want to go fast, go yourself. If you want to go far, go together. And I think this maybe could be providing us, swarms could be a structure through which we could go far together.
That would be the idea. So we can do it as well quickly. That is very important.
Seems like a great place to end. Thanks so much for being on the Greenpill podcast, Daniel.
Thanks a lot for having me, Kevin. Have a good day, everyone.
You just heard from Daniel Ospina. I'm really excited about Rn DAO and Swarms. I think that they are doing some interesting work over there. Thank you for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. Again, we are featuring the people who are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world. If you value our work, you can collect this episode. Go to pods.media/greenpill and find episodes and start collecting. While you're here, may as well make an offering to our algorithmic overlords. Please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps people find the Green Pill Network and the regenerative crypto economic movement. Peace and love. See you next time. Bye-bye.